Welcome everybody to this Corporate Governance Initiative webinar. My name is Jo Paisley. I'm the president of GARP's Risk Institute. And for those of you who don't know GARP, we are the Global Association of Risk Professionals, a US-based membership organization that focuses on risk education. And we love talking about all things risk. We also do recognize, though, there are plenty of opportunities out there, which usually gets the juices going of those board members who are interested in managing really quite a tricky world that we're in at the moment. Delighted to have fantastic group of people to talk about the World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report. So I'm going to actually start by introducing Mark Elsner, who is the head of the Global Risks Initiative at the World Economic Forum and one of the key players in the construction of this report. And actually, Mark, you're going to take us through the key headlines and key insights from the report, and then we're going to go on to a kind of panel discussion. There's going to be plenty of time for Q&A, so please put your questions. We think that the Q&A box works. That's the one I'm hoping I'm going to be monitoring for lots of questions from the audience. So do keep those coming as we go through. But over to you, Mark, to take us through the report.
Thank you very much, Jo, and it's a great pleasure to be here representing the World Economic Forum. I'm going to share my screen now. I trust everyone can see the opening page here of our Global Risks Report 2025. I'm going to give, as Jo mentioned, a fairly high-level, quick overview of the key results of our report, which was released in January this year. And then during the Q&A and the panel discussion, of course, we can drill down into any areas in further detail. So the Global Risk Report, just to give you a brief outline of what it is a report that looks ahead to the global risks landscape. And when I say global risks, we cover 5 types of risks, essentially. Societal, technological, economic, environmental, and geopolitical risks. And we look at these risks across 3 time frames. The immediate term, so 2025, the 2-year outlook to 2027, and the 10-year outlook to 2035. And the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report, it is based on a survey methodology. So we make use of the excellent networks available to the World Economic Forum, and we survey almost 1,000 decision makers and experts from all the key stakeholder groups, so including business, government, academia, international organizations, civil society, and the youth. That's the core survey. It's called the Global Risks Perception Survey. We complement it with a second survey called the Executive Opinion Survey, which is a survey of business leaders in 120 countries, over 11,000 business leaders. And we use that to add flavor to the analysis in certain parts of the report. And finally, we discuss and gain guidance and insights from a wide range of experts on a qualitative basis. Around 150 contributed to this year's report. Very quickly on the survey sample composition, geographically, perhaps the main point to note, it is a little bit skewed, let's say, towards Europe and to a lesser degree North America, reflecting the fact that the forum has grown up in Europe, but year after year is becoming more geographically diverse. So this is the list of risks that we cover. As you can see, there are 33. They don't change too much year on year because we want to make sure that we have comparability across the years. I won't read through them all now because I'm going to go over which ones came top of our rankings in just one moment. But before I do that, let me just give you an overview of one of the other important questions asked in the survey, and that is how people are feeling about the outlook for the world over the near term, let's say the near term 2 years, and the long term 10 years. So on both time horizons, unfortunately, respondents are pessimistic. Over a 2-year time period, 36% assess the outlook to be either stormy or turbulent, which are the two worst categories that we offered. However, this rises to 63% over the course of 10 years. So the outlook for the long term, according to our survey respondents, is actually quite a lot worse than it is for the 2-year time horizon. We, of course, many of us are already thinking this is somewhat difficult global environment that we're already in. I'll come back to those results in a moment. We also look at the interconnectedness of risks, and we ask questions to specifically draw out which risks are the most interconnected. And the one that comes top, interestingly, is inequality, followed by declining health and well-being. So it's interesting to just reflect on that for a moment and think that if only we could globally reduce inequality, then that would have knock-on positive effects in terms of reducing the severity of a whole host of other global risks. Now, onto the rankings themselves. 2025, as mentioned, the short-term outlook. This ranking is dominated by geopolitical risks, the orange color here. So first and third place, perhaps no surprise. And arguably, the two risks that are listed here, state-based armed conflict in first place, and geoeconomic confrontation, so trade wars in third place. Arguably, both of those risks have not got any better since the report was released in January and since the survey was undertaken in September, October last year. It's interesting just how many people, 23% of respondents, place state-based armed conflict as the leading risk of concern. A quick look at divergence by age group. So economic downturn, as you can see, was 6th in the short-term risk ranking overall, but the younger age cohorts, in particular the under 30s, placed it much higher in their rankings. And you can see that economic downturn was assessed as a lower severity risk by older age groups. As it turns out, perhaps with economic downturn having sort of risen over the last couple of months in people's risk perceptions, I would assume perhaps the younger cohorts were right in this case. The path to 2027. So the list here, the ranking of the top 10 is not that different to the ranking for 2025. However, state-based armed conflict does fall a little bit. Geoeconomic confrontation falls. Perhaps that would, again, be somewhat different given developments in terms of trade conflicts over the last month or two. The list is heavily populated by societal risks. That's the red category. But leading this ranking is misinformation and disinformation, the same as last year, in fact. And cyber espionage and warfare in 5th place is a second technological risk that comes quite high in the ranking. Perhaps interesting to note what is not there in the top 10. There's so much conversation about AI and the potential positive and negative impacts AI is going to have in the coming years, but it doesn't make it into the top 10 of concerns over these two shorter term time horizons. Very interesting to note, of course, that there are two environmental risks in the top 10 here: extreme weather events and pollution. And again, we may go into these in more depth in the rest of this session. A quick look at stakeholders over the short term. The green, again, being environmental risks. So you can see that civil society is the group overall that is most concerned by environmental risk. 4 out of the top 10 risks in the civil society stakeholder group are environmental in nature, and somewhat less for the other 4 groups, although they each have 2 environmental risks in their top 10. Now, onto the world in 2035, and this is where I think we can safely say that the ranking is very unlikely to have been affected by events, developments over the last several months. Of course, arguments can be made that policy changes, etc., may have worsened or perhaps improved in some cases the environmental outlook for the long term. But the reason I'm pretty confident saying that this list is unlikely to have been significantly affected by recent developments is because it is not that dissimilar from the top 10 last year or even the year before. Environmental risks, so the green category here, dominate the outlook to 2035 when it comes to the risk ranking. So extreme weather events was also present, as you saw, in the 2 shorter term rankings, but it is joined by biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse, critical change to Earth systems, natural resource shortages, and pollution. And interestingly, I mentioned AI earlier. It wasn't in the top 10 in the shorter term, but adverse outcomes of AI technologies do make it into the top 10 in 6th place here over the longer term. So perhaps that's saying that people, they do feel that there are risks coming down the pike with AI, but it's perhaps a little bit difficult for them to put their finger on what precisely the impacts of those AI risks could be in the shorter term. Again, just a quick overview to show you that all stakeholder groups are extremely concerned by environmental risks over the long term. I think that's very clear by this chart. Regionally, there is an interesting finding. The Middle East and North Africa is the only region that does not place environmental risks at the very top of their long-term ranking. You can see there 3 out of the top 5 in the Middle East and North Africa, including the top 3, are not environmental risks. And just to conclude, and thinking back to the first finding I shared about how pessimistic people are about the long term compared to the short term, it's notable that in the short term, geopolitical risks are so much higher up the ranking, whereas in the long term, it really is all environmental risks. So there seems to be a perception that one way or another, the world will work its way through and out of the current geopolitical risks. But over a 10-year time horizon, unfortunately, environmental risks loom very large. Let me stop there. I can come back to this slide if there's time, and due course, a quick look back over 20 years of the Global Risks Report. Suffice it to say that environmental risks, not only this year, not only the last 2 years, but over the long term, have been working their way towards the top of our 10-year risk ranking, and as mentioned, seem to be there now, pretty clearly locked in to the top of that 10-year ranking. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. There's a comment in the Q&A box actually that misinformation and disinformation are being driven by, of course, AI in particular. So maybe that's the way that people are seeing the risks come through, and the AI is just kind of lurking in the background. Thanks, Mark. It was a really, really good and very clear presentation and huge kind of insights there on the risk landscape. I want to turn now to our panelists, and I'm going to turn to Alejandro Diaz de Leon. Probably said that wrong, but hopefully not butchered it too much. He's been corporate director of Grupo BAL, or BAL, since March 2022, and he's got a fabulous kind of history as a central banker. As a former central banker myself, I really admire what the Bank of Mexico did. He was a former governor there. Mexico was a founding member of the network of greening the financial system, which, for those of you who are into this kind of thing, there's been an incredibly influential network across central banks and supervisors, if you like, a coalition of the willing, trying to tackle some of the more difficult kind of environmental issues that we face. So, Alejandro, reflecting on the findings of this report and your own experience in the boardroom, how can board directors navigate through these environmental risks in particular? But obviously, do feel free to comment on anything you see in the risk report, because they are, as Mark alluded to, they are so interconnected. It's quite difficult to just look at environmental without looking at all of these others. But just thinking through, in terms of a company, in terms of its own operations and its value chain, give us your thoughts.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, probably I'll start saying that I have two key messages that I think board members and executives should have in mind. The first is, I think we have to deal with the circumstances that we have, not the ones that we would like. And unfortunately, that has been very clear recently. We have to fully understand context. We're moving from globalization to fragmentation, and also living in very noisy times. So I think this is to be realistic about this. I think how did this started? I think social media, COVID, and post-COVID has significantly increased fragmentation. I think this trend has been accelerated by recent changes in US trade policy. And I think that has been inducing deglobalization. We have been experiencing a shift from globalization to nearshoring and now to onshoring. We have seen the tensions from, let's say, the US decoupling from the world economy and mainly from China. We have seen the effects of weakening rule of law and global institutions, which is clearly deterring investment. And also we have seen what we can call deep uncertainty, which has increased financial markets volatility in the FX, fixed income and equities markets. And clearly economic growth is rapidly decelerating and a recession looms. And I think Mark pointed into these economic downturn risks. So the first message is be realistic. The second is the only answer to fragmentation, which we saw as one of the key risks that Mark highlighted, a common denominator, I would say is risk and climate change. The only way to cope with fragmentation is promoting a shared vision at all levels. And clearly I'm highlighting this for all of us in our organizations. We need business strategies that align individual interests with the common good. We need to reach common ground for prosperity and sustainability. And I think there are two main ways that these incentives or motivation can go through into organization and companies. One is with external disciplinary mechanisms. This comes with law, regulation, accounting standards, and best practice, the kind of things as in my previous responsibility, we were trying to steer the boat towards these objectives. But both global and at global and national levels, these mechanisms and incentives have been weakening, basically because of a wider spectrum in political swings. We have seen varying degrees of enthusiasm for the sustainability agenda, both in advanced and also emerging markets. It's not only in advanced economies, it's also in emerging markets. So we cannot rely only on these external disciplinary mechanisms to work. We have to focus on the internal disciplinary mechanisms. And this is where these board members and executives can play a critical role. The essence of any organization comes from its definition of vision, mission, purpose, its true north. Executives and board members act in a way what I would call as GPS or navigators of organizations. And these, I think it's critical to assume this role. And first, it has two dimensions. One is identifying the organization's purpose. And these are what I call this defining the true north. And second is helping navigate the organization's challenges in these two main risks, fragmentation and climate change that Mark mentioned, and I fully agree. I would say in this regard, there are three key issues to focus regarding this role of organizations' GPS navigation systems. One is define the destination. And I think organizations need to be very long-term, have a long-term view in terms of their goals, and define goals in terms of shared prosperity. As I said, this is a shared vision. Second is about the instruments. How do you attain this? Well, I think there are 4 key elements. One is decision-making. For decision-making, you have to take responsibility of the impact of your footprint, of all of the footprints of all of your actions. Second, I think transparency is critical. Transparency is a powerful incentive to promote good behavior. Third, I would say accountability. And fourth, resilience. And given the risks that were highlighted, I think stress testing and having, I would say, a rapid error correction type of response in all of our organization is critical. So building resilience is essential. And the third item for this GPS navigation system approach is consider all stakeholders of the organization. Don't leave anyone behind. I think you have to be mindful of employees, of the organization itself, the community, or the communities in which that organization operates, and also having a broader awareness of society objectives and goals. And I would say that this is a good place to mention very briefly some of the principles of the climate governance initiative. And I would say there are 8 goals. One is own the problem. Second, understand the problem. Third, assign accountability. 4, prepare for multiple scenarios of the problem. 5, treat climate issues as core business challenges. 6, promote organization alignment. 7, avoid blind spots for the organization and all stakeholders. And 8, be open, flexible, and willing to learn. And I would add a final one to these principles, which is we need to be positive, we need to be constructive, we need to build social capital. I think we are all called to be part of the solutions, and we have to do our part. And I think this is a key thing that can motivate us to really address these global risks that Mark was talking about. We should not see them as a pushback. We should see them as a challenge to embrace them, to address them, and to bring our better version and the better version of our organizations to the challenge. And probably I can stop here and also wait for other topics in the Q&A. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. That was like a masterclass in positivity, which is extraordinary given how obscenely early it is in Mexico. So thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed that. So let me introduce Liselott Engström, who's the chair of Boards Impact Forum, which is the Nordic chapter of the Corporate Governance Initiative. Vast experience across listed private and non-profit boards. I certainly can't go through her whole CV here. She's also the founder of Digestion, a board-level think tank. So fabulous experience. Liselott, the risk report's been coming out now for 20 years. You know, I'm interested in your perspective and how useful they are for companies and boards. And I wouldn't mind sort of thinking also about, does it help you at all with the opportunities side of for your corporate strategy? Because there's an awful lot going wrong in the world, but does it help you think about opportunities on the commercial side? Over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to Climate Governance Initiative and World Economic Forum for inviting me and to my fellow speakers here. If I start in the first end, it's definitely helping us. It's one of the key reports that many boards have as one of their inputs. If I am looking a bit, since I have experience across both private and listed companies and larger and smaller, I would, however, say that in larger companies, the entire risk area is very much handled by experts, which sometimes means that boards are not as fully engaged and driven into looking at the topics. And smaller companies might look at them in some ways that a lot of companies now do in very short term. So when things have changed so much so quickly, I think the context right now is that it's definitely fragmentation. There's so many issues on the table, but it's also the speed of the issues. I think the speed of the issues we haven't really seen now. And if you haven't, as Alejandro very nicely puts it, really adjusted your long-term vision, it's very much harder to have something to hold on to. And it's much easier to react to what's coming. So I would say that is a big thing. I think that most boards can do better on actually spending a bit more time on the longer perspectives and actually more support the management on the shorter perspectives. And actually help with clarifying the direction. I think the thing with all of the things going on, and I do agree on the comment in the chat as well, that AI right now is one of the top topics on boards' agendas. And it does impact so many things, everything from geopolitics to climate to our own business models. And most of us have not yet rethought our business aligned with the impact on that. And I would urge that boards quite quickly start to look at that dimension as well. Then I have to underpin and underline what Alejandro said about hope, to be honest. One of the things I say to my own leaders is that we are both as part of society and as board members, we actually have a lot of power. Let's use that power to help direct where we want to go. And we might not change the entire world, but let's focus on all of the areas where we can change and start to be a bit of a role model, which isn't easy because most of board members are quite shy and not very visible, which is strange in terms of where most of us coming from. I would also add that I see as one of the biggest risks is actually a bit of wait and see moment for a lot of businesses right now. And I think the wait and see in terms of trades might be fine, but the wait and see in terms of where we're going is no longer fine. You really have to take out and then rather change. So I think the report is truly valuable because it's a really good thing. I think most boards take it in as a perspective and a scenario, but I think it's truly important that boards really create scenarios for their own businesses, which isn't really always done either.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, no, I think that the point about hope is very well taken. I was curious, actually, just coming back to you, Mark, that I love the chart of the interconnections that you put up, but you had inequality right at the middle there, as if that was some sort of lever. So I wouldn't mind kind of understanding that a little bit more, because on many of the breakdowns, inequality wasn't ranked that highly. So yeah, just explain a little bit more about that, because that seemed quite important to me.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks very much also for those really fascinating contributions just now. So yeah, inequality, we asked a separate question to the questions that gave rise to the ranking in order to establish the interconnectedness between risks. And we actually assigned respondents a random risk and then asked them to note which 10 risks that risk would be most interconnected to. And you're right to point out, so inequality was in the middle, health and well-being was very prominent. Societal risks in general were very prominent. And we were a little surprised, actually, that environmental risks were not seen as so interconnected. Now, we can speculate a little bit about why this is, why certain answers were given. It could be there's still certain gap in understanding the connections between environmental risks and other risks, like societal ones, like technology, geopolitical. I mean, everything is interconnected. But inequality was the one that that came out top among our respondents. It's hard to sort of speculate precisely, why it did, but it did. And I think you can trace through it's very interconnected to other societal risks for sure. It's very interconnected, of course, to geopolitical risks, to technology risks via societal polarization. So you can kind of make the case post hoc, why it came out so strongly, but we didn't, even though we do ask our respondents for, to add qualitative color to their answers, we don't have a complete enough set of qualitative responses to be able to sort of fully understand what was driving their rankings of inequality there.
Yeah, and interesting. I mean, that was the thing that sort of screamed at me, that maybe inequality is driving, many of these other risks. So just getting back to the audience, please do pop your questions in a Q&A. But I mean, I've got plenty of questions myself, but this is really your opportunity to ask any of the panelists for their views on whatever is facing you in your particular boards. Alejandro, I mean, I'm interested in this point about managing the short-term and the long-term risks, which Lieselot was talking about. How do you find that tension within your own boards? Do you find you're focused too much on the short term, and any words of advice on how to get that right balance?
Yes, I think this is the one of the key issues, because in the short term you're very concerned about results and about the KPIs, and every organization needs to survive the short term in order to discuss the long term. So there is always this tension on the immediate returns, but also this understanding that if the institution is not well aligned, what I've said, to the vision, purpose, or the true north, that really aligns its role within the community, the society in general, and its own objectives, I think then the short-term concerns can really spiral or misalign with these goals, and make it harder to, at the end of the day, attain all of the objectives of the organization. So sometimes it's the perception is that there is a trade-off between the short term and the long term, and it's really not much of a trade-off if you understand that there has to be a narrow path where you align the short-term objectives and the short-term objective of the organization and attaining them with the long-term vision of the organization. And if you're not finding that intersection point or that narrow corridor, then I think you have to look again and look again. And I think that's probably one of the issues that sometimes some executives believe, that we have to focus on the short term now, and then we can worry or discuss about the long-term issues. And I think the long term usually is closer than appears. I think at the end of the day, also in the question regarding inequality, I think inequality probably has a high ranking in the response, because it's like it's highly correlated to the lack of fairness. And where probably people are saying, if the system is not fair, well, maybe you don't engage in the system with the confidence and trust that you would like them to engage. So I think we have to create an atmosphere of trust and of fairness. And if the outlook is not trustworthy or fair, then people are not going to engage in the best way. And probably that's one way to try to understand why inequality was such a high ranking in the risk list.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, your point about short and long term. I mean, you can see it playing out a little bit in the report, in that the environmental concerns are always the top concerns, you know, in 10 years' time. But in the short term, we're dealing with all of the other concerns. And I just wonder whether that's, you know, always going to be the case. And we think, well, we'll deal with those kind of further down the line. But, oh, we've got all these other things to deal with in the short term. Liselott, what do you think about getting that balance? How do you make sure that your boards take enough time to look at the long term, but balance those short-term concerns, which, let's face it, at the moment, there must be a lot of concerns coming at boards, a lot, you know, the speed of it that you were talking about. How do you get that right balance?
Well, I'm not sure we always do get it right. I mean, we are also humans and sometimes we also react, but I find that one of the ways actually that a lot of boards handle things, especially the larger ones, that is to actually divert certain topics into the different committees. So you usually have a risk and audit committee, you sometimes have a sustainability committee, you have committees that can dive a bit deeper in the topic and prepare it so that it becomes board level. I think a lot of the topics that comes now, and to go away a bit from the environmental thing, to take an example that I think most people can relate to, and that is around cybersecurity. How do you oversee cybersecurity from the board? Well, I mean, if you get a fantastic presentation with a lot of details and discussions around neural networks and state actors, etc., you kind of end up sitting there in the board and say, that's interesting, but what should I do about that? And what you really need to do is to get help to prepare certain topics so that you can see how you can influence things. And I think it's the same thing around sustainability. I also think we need to be smart as boards. And I just saw somebody comments that it's, in a lot of ways, you haven't actually seen the impact. You can't see the correlation, especially around environmental things, to your own business. And you just have to pop in examples so it becomes lively for people. So one of the things that I pop into my is that, are you aware that actually 60% of the information technology services is delivered from India today in the world? If so, and India is challenged now with climate, what might that impact any of our companies today? And then you try to get everybody to see that you might not directly, I mean, you might not even operate in that region, but you're still dependent on it. I think now with the trade and the geopolitical issues, I think it's somewhat easier for people to see that we have dependencies that we thought were very safe and sound, but maybe we didn't think them through enough and actually put into a number of different scenarios and actually putting a bit of risk hedge on where we put our actions.
Yeah, no, very well, well made points. We've got a question here. How would you explain the criticality of environmental issues versus a global trend of regulatory simplification, relaxation? It's a great question, very topical. Does anybody particularly want to have a go at that? Okay, Alejandro,
Well,
pass it to you first,
Okay.
and then we'll
No,
go to Liselott.
I think this is very linked to these short-term versus long-term type of alignment. I think that deregulation and let's say incentives for short-term behavior and profitability in the organization may be seen as a trade-off or having to jeopardize long-term vision and goals. And that's why I was mentioning that intersection needs to be fully attained, and that narrow corridor that fully aligns short-term incentives and short-term goals with long-term ones. And this challenge on how to internalize externalities and how to really account for what happens to the world and together with what happens with the organization, I think in that balance, probably one way to address it, at least partially, is at least you have to own your full footprint. And you have to own and be accountable and responsible for the full impact of what you do in the society and the communities that you operate. And if you do that, I think at the end of the day, you will steer the boat towards, I would say, that right path of this better alignment with a sustainable long-term vision and with, let's say, micro or short-term goals.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose just one challenge to that is that's an awful lot easier to do if everybody in your sector and your competitors are also owning their own footprint, you know, which is easier in a context of strong regulation. But Lisa, what's your perspective on this kind of rollback?
Yeah, so maybe I'll give my first perspective is around that right now I think we sit in a much more uncertain view of if there is a rollback or not. And I think that in itself isn't good. I mean, we all need clarity to do business, which kind of goes to your second question. But if I look at the Europe in particular, I think we got the regulators got too happy to actually regulate too many things at once. And that is as dangerous as the situation we're in now. And especially related to boards. And I have a lot of discussions with my own board colleagues and board members across that. One of the things that has happened over the last 1 or 2 years, depending on when you report, is that you kind of feel that the organization has been so drowning in reporting that you actually have left the strategy on the table. And my argument is still, while the board isn't that occupied, is it? Because they're part of reviewing. But there's a lot of things going on in that I think steers, and also if we have advisors on the call, I think they can actually help much better. They, especially in Europe, they took on a very box ticking orientation, if I say it like that. But in fact, one of the areas that I think has gone terribly wrong is how have we actually looked at materiality and how did we ever integrate it back into the full business risk? And if you follow the box ticking and if you follow actually how the regulation is written, it never says that it's supposed to be integrated back in again. It just says that it's supposed to be continuing. I understand that as intelligent people, we're supposed to be doing that, but you might not even be part of that working process, getting it back quickly enough so you can influence that. So I think, again, boards really need to think out where are the key points where you can influence and you can guide, because in fact, if you leave it too much, you let your organization drown in reporting on things they actually even shouldn't have reported on because they report on too much and weren't given the guidance from you. And you could actually have steered that better. So I think that's what I mean with regulation. Regulation still needs to be put in a useful perspective by the board. You can't just say somebody else is going to do it. So I don't know if that helps, but...
Yeah. No, it does help. It's interesting. It's like making the regulations smart. There's another question here, which actually I want to follow up with you, Liselott, because it's about scenario analysis, and I think this is really critical. You know, it can help boards and the business prepare for different future risks. Would more support for boards in how to conduct and embed scenario planning activities for their organization be helpful? What's your view on, you know, the level of awareness of how to do it and the best practices out there?
Yeah. And I would say that some sectors are better than others, partly because they're regulated on the topic, like the financial services sector. However, they're very good at the areas where they are regulated, maybe not as good at actually looking at it as a matching, because I think you need to look at scenarios in a couple of steps. And one of them is to figure out what are the scenarios happening in the market, but then what is the scenarios where we are going to put our bets on? And I think it's easy to get drowned in the overall scenarios, so that you don't spend enough time on looking at your business scenarios. And I usually take this example about, it's especially now with AI, and everybody talks about, oh, now we need to optimize these areas or these support functions. And I'm kind of thinking, should we even have them? Should somebody else take care of them and actually being the ones optimize that for us? And we would be much better off in optimizing maybe a customer scenario thing. And I think that is the role of the board, to really think through that. I have to say, though, in response to the question, that there is a need to make scenarios easier, to make it easier to work with. We don't have the luxury of all of this time to spend a lot of time. So you need help to actually have some scenarios prefigured that I think actually World Economic Forum is helping us with. And then you need to find ways to have not just the risk professionals, but actually the management and the board discussing the scenarios and agreeing on where do we really have the materiality in our current business, and should we even be there?
Yeah. Alejandro, kind of your perspective on scenario analysis, or any other tools that you found particularly effective for highlighting these risks and opportunities in your boards?
Yes, probably being in an emerging market, we're more used to simulation of let's say unpredictable things, or maybe the changing things that affect the underlying or the bottom line, because we're more exposed to volatility. And I think that this even happened with COVID. I mean, we probably emerging markets were a little bit more agile in responding to some of these rapid changes one way or the other. And I would say that in part that reflects that we're more used to these extreme scenarios. And I do think it is very important to have these extreme scenarios presented at the board, and the board owning what would be the response of the organization if those scenarios materialize. And I think it's very important to think this beforehand, because once you have the shock and once you have this impact, it's better to have been at least trained in a similar shock. You will never simulate exactly the shock that you're going to get, but at least you even the anxiety that the shock can induce, I think it's better addressed and coped with at the board level if there is this let's say practice of having these extreme scenarios being handled. And I would say even at my previous responsibility as a central banker, central bankers are relying less, let's say, on nice scenarios and thinking more out of the box for extreme scenarios. I think this is a learning lesson from COVID. And I think it's useful to have this time of extreme scenarios just to, let's say, train the reaction function of organizations. And I think that that's something important to do. I think cybersecurity is a very good example. I agree with Soledad that this is one way to extrapolate those type of exercises, because really you have to think about the scenario that you're being completely shut down. What do you do? How do you respond? And so on. And I think that is a good framework to put it into, let's say, business models, how AI is going to change your business, your competition. Are you going to insource or outsource, as Liselotte was mentioning? So I do believe that we have to be creative about scenarios, and we have to get used to digesting scenarios, even though I agree they can get a little bit complex sometimes.
Yeah, no, good points there. It's interesting because we've worked with the Corporate Governance Initiative and with Chapter Zero in the UK putting together scenarios for boards. And we've done 3 climate ones and 1 nature one. And when I look back, some of the first ones we did, which was only a few years ago, we were tempted to say, no, that's too extreme. But actually, every single risk that we've had has actually happened in real life, and usually much worse than we thought. So it's difficult to think about the plausibility, because I think, sometimes we don't like to go to those tail risks, but I think you're right. I think actually we do need to kind of look into those tails, particularly when it's, a simple kind of set of risks. What would we do if the whole country lost its electricity for a day? It's not that far-fetched, is it? Mark, just back to you in terms of anything you've heard so far, and maybe picking up on this scenario point as well. Any sort of reflections on what boards need to think more about when confronted with this just myriad of risks?
Yeah, thank you. Let me just start with the previous point about deregulation and environmental risks, because I think maybe one additional point, in addition to all the great points already made, is that independently of regulation, we see things like extreme weather events, pollution, having more and more direct business impacts anyway, whether there's regulation or not. And I think to give some examples, I mean, pollution, every week it seems there's new research coming out about the impacts of pollution on human health. And what does this mean for absenteeism, from work, lower productivity, and how's that going to work its way through to corporate decisions about, where to locate offices and factories in the future, for example. Extreme weather events as well, leading to flooding of rivers, ports, and supply chains can be compromised for weeks or months, as they regularly are following extreme weather events. So I just think, regulation or not, it's these kinds of environmental risks are ones that will have to be considered carefully by boards. I'm sure in many cases they already are. So that's on environmental and regulation. And in terms of scenarios, yeah, I very much concur with everything that's been said. We do a lot of scenarios work here at the forum, and we try to take a 3-level approach. What is happening globally? What does it mean at a sector or geographical level? And then what does it mean for a specific organization? And work our way through each of those. And I think scenarios, in a way, it's like the objective is to sort of develop a culture of thinking in terms of scenarios within the entire organization, just so that not only the leadership, but also everybody in the organization is, as Alejandro said, psychologically prepared for when things start going wrong, and can react faster, can make decisions, better decisions in a shorter space of time, and gain competitive advantage through that. So I think, in addition to having scenarios, workshops, which, as Lisa said, they can be time consuming. It can be helpful to involve a lot of people in different parts of the organization to collectively build those scenarios. In addition to that, I think it is valuable to keep updating the scenarios, every 6 months or so at least, to come back and say, well, maybe there's one scenario that can be discarded now, but maybe there's a new one we need to add, or maybe there's some adjustments to be made to the scenarios we previously envisaged. And I think by keep doing that regularly, it really helps. It really helps to get that preparedness there. And also, a final point, to help to link up the long term with the short term, as Alejandro was saying. Scenarios are more important, arguably, when you're looking at the long term future, but you have to then be able to link them back to decisions that are made in the short term. So they are a very good tool for establishing that narrow path and linking the short term to the long term.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's interesting, actually, because I used to be the global head of stress testing at HSBC, which is just extraordinarily kind of complex thing you have to do to stress test the whole group. But one of the things I found very interesting there actually was doing the reverse stress test, which was thinking what can kill the group. And then you really do focus on your key vulnerabilities. If this region goes down, we've had it. And I think that's probably something the boards need help on. Like, where do you start prioritizing all of this? Because otherwise it's just overwhelming. We're running out of time. We've had fantastic kind of engagement from the audience. Thank you very much. But I want to just kind of leave you, all of you, just with, your last kind of parting words of wisdom, if you like, for the audience. Alejandro, why don't we start with you? Just a brief kind of roundup of last thoughts.
Yes. Probably I would say that we have to avoid falling trap of polarization and fragmentation. I think we have to work towards shared goals and objectives. It doesn't matter how noisy things can get. We have to look for the intersection point. If we don't have a shared vision, it's going to be winner takes all, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and it's going to be very volatile. So don't fall trap into polarization and fragmentation, and be optimistic and look for shared values and common goals. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, Mark, how about you?
Thank you. I would say, going back to our risks report, it is essential, I think, for all organizations to take the risk landscape seriously, to understand it, and to use that then as a platform for figuring out what are the solutions and what are the ways forward. So as Alejandro mentioned again in his comments, it's not about dwelling endlessly on these risks. Understand them, figure out the steps to move forward, and there's a lot of great opportunities and a lot of work being done, including here at the forum, where, by the way, we're quite a small team, the risk team. Most of the forum is working on solutions. And so there's a lot, I think, to be to look out for and to build with.
Thank you. Liselott, you get the last words here.
So I just want to mention that we actually researched disruption and boards. And we contrasted COVID, the war, sustainability, and AI. And COVID and war, actually, boards were quite good at handling. But the long term that comes creeping at us, we're not as good at. So in that, I would also say in another research, we have looked at how we spend our time. And if you can, not in any other way, at least time box yourself and think about that you spend as much time on guiding your organizations for development and opportunities as you do by supervising it, that will create much more future value for your companies.
Yeah, brilliant. Fantastic words of advice there. And I think we're, just about on time. Thank you. Thanks to the audience, and thanks to our panelists, and thanks to Mark for a great presentation. I hope you all found that really useful. I found it actually very inspiring, as somebody who's not on a board, but it's great to hear your words of advice. I would love to know who that 11% who are calm at the moment are. Where are they living and what are they on? Because I want whatever. And there's 8% that are going to be calm in 10 years. So there are people out there who are obviously not aware of what's going on in the world at all, or they've managed to navigate there. Maybe they're on a desert island somewhere. But anyway, hopefully today has helped all of you kind of just inspire you that little bit more. Do use the resources from the World Economic Forum. They're terrific. And actually, just a little plug for GARP as well. We've got lots of resources on our website too. One thing you might find useful is the GARP Climate Risk podcast, for example, which some people from the CGI have been on as well, and Chapter Zero. So we look at climate from all different angles, and that's usually the best way to look at most things, actually. It's very rarely black and white, and many of the issues we talked about today are actually highly nuanced as well. But thank you once again to our panelists and to Mark for a presentation, and thanks to CGI for putting this great webinar on.
And thanks to you, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.